She was not Egyptian. Cleopatra VII Philopatra was born in 69 BCE in Alexandria, Egypt, but her bloodline came from Macedon, not from the Nile, but from the campaigns of Alexander the Great. Her family, the Ptolemies, had ruled Egypt since 305 BCE, after Alexander's general, Ptolemy the Soter, declared himself pharaoh. It had been nearly 250 years since that day, and by the time Cleopatra was born, the dynasty was crumbling. Egypt was still rich, but its rulers had grown weak, greedy, violent. The Ptolemies married their siblings and murdered their rivals. Incest was tradition, assassination was policy. Cleopatra's father, Ptolemy XII Auletes, was not a strong king. His nickname meant the flute player. He was known more for wine and music than leadership. His rule was unpopular. He raised taxes to pay for Roman support. He sold Egypt's future for his own survival. Cleopatra's mother is unknown. Some speculate it was Cleopatra V Tryphena, perhaps even his sister or cousin. Records are vague, and that is no accident. The Ptolemies controlled history with knives and fire. What didn't serve the dynasty was erased. Cleopatra was born into a decaying kingdom. She grew up in the royal palace in Alexandria, a city of marble and scholars, ships and spies. Alexandria was the jewel of the Mediterranean, with the lighthouse of Pharaoh and the great library standing tall. But behind the beauty was fear. Betrayal ran in the family. Siblings were not playmates, they were rivals. Ptolemy XII had 6 children. Cleopatra was the third daughter. She had 2 older sisters, Cleopatra VI and Berenice IV, and 2 younger brothers, Ptolemy XIII and Ptolemy XIV. She was not the heir, she was not expected to rule, but she was watching and learning. Unlike most of her family, Cleopatra spoke Egyptian, the language of the people. The Ptolemies usually kept to Greek. Cleopatra learned both, and Latin, and Aramaic, and several others. She was educated in philosophy, mathematics, astronomy, and politics. This was not out of curiosity, it was out of necessity, because power in Egypt was never inherited, it was taken. In 58 BCE, Cleopatra was about 11 years old, and her father, Ptolemy XII, was no longer on the throne. The Alexandrians had had enough. His taxes were unbearable. His alliance with Rome, especially with Pompey the Great and the corrupt governor Gabinius, cost Egypt its dignity. The final blow came when Ptolemy gave Cyprus, ruled by his brother, to Rome. His brother committed suicide. The people rioted, the priests denounced him, and Ptolemy fled. He went to Rome begging for help. He brought bribes, heavy ones. Historians say he spent nearly 6,000 talents of silver, an astronomical sum, to buy back his throne. Back in Egypt, his daughter Berenice IV seized power. She claimed the crown for herself, possibly with the support of her mother or a husband. But her reign was short. 3 years later, in 55 BCE, Roman soldiers marched into Alexandria. Gabinius, governor of Syria, brought them, illegally. With Roman steel and Egyptian gold, Ptolemy XII was restored, and he took revenge. Berenice IV was executed, her allies were hunted. The Roman soldiers, now called the Gabiniani, stayed behind. They became Ptolemy's enforcers, foreign mercenaries with no loyalty except to gold. Cleopatra witnessed all of this. She had watched her sister rise and fall. She saw her father kill his own daughter to regain power. She understood what it meant to survive in this palace. From that moment, she would not underestimate the power of Rome or the danger of family. Her father's second reign was bitter and paranoid. He ruled as a puppet of Rome and died in 51 BCE, leaving behind 2 sons, Ptolemy XIII, only about 10 years old, and Ptolemy XIV, even younger. But he did not leave the crown to them alone. By Egyptian custom, a male had to rule, but by Roman calculation, Cleopatra was the true heir. She was around 18 years old, and she had already shown signs of intelligence, confidence, and ambition. In his will, Ptolemy XII named Cleopatra VII and Ptolemy XIII as co-rulers, brother and sister, husband and wife. This was normal for the Ptolemies, but it wouldn't last. In 51 BCE, Cleopatra and her younger brother Ptolemy XIII officially became co-rulers of Egypt. She was about 18, he was 10. On paper they ruled together. In reality, she ruled alone. Her face appeared on coins without his. She signed documents without his name. She dropped the usual female consort titles and called herself simply Thea Philopator, goddess who loves her father. And she didn't hide her opinions. She chose to align more openly with Rome, pushing against the influence of native Egyptian priests. She spoke Egyptian, the language of the people, the first Ptolemy to do so. She began taking control of foreign affairs, especially with Syria and Judea. But that kind of independence made her enemies. In 50 BCE, famine struck. The Nile failed to flood, crops dried, starvation spread, people blamed Cleopatra. Then came a crisis on Egypt's eastern border with Syria. Cleopatra tried to handle it herself, sending troops, dispatching orders. She bypassed the royal advisors, mostly men aligned with the boy king's guardians. She was cutting too many people out. By 49 BCE, a full palace coup was in motion. Ptolemy XIII's powerful advisors, especially his chief regent Pothinus, his tutor Theodotus, and a general named Achilles, turned the boy against his sister wife. They stripped Cleopatra of her title, removed her from court, and forced her to flee Alexandria. She went east, into Syria. Then she raised her own army. Now Egypt was divided. In 48 BCE, Cleopatra returned to the eastern border with her troops and faced off against her brother's forces near Pelusium. It was Egypt's first civil war in over a century, and the country was split between two children of the same blood. But Cleopatra had something her brother didn't. She had timing. In 48 BCE, while Cleopatra and Ptolemy XIII clashed at the eastern edge of Egypt, Rome was also at war with itself. Julius Caesar had just defeated Pompey the Great at the Battle of Pharsalus in Greece. Pompey fled and sailed to Egypt, hoping to find refuge with the boy king, Ptolemy XIII, who owed Rome his throne. But Egypt's advisors had a different plan. On September 28, Pompey was lured ashore at Pelusium. He was murdered, beheaded by Ptolemy's officers, his body burned in the sand. His head was kept as a trophy, a gift for Caesar. When Julius Caesar arrived in Alexandria a few days later, he was not impressed. He demanded stability, order, and payment of Egypt's debt to Rome, and he wanted to mediate the Ptolemaic civil war. Cleopatra saw her chance. According to later sources, especially Plutarch, writing about a century later, Cleopatra had herself smuggled into Caesar's presence, hidden inside a rolled-up carpet or bed sack, carried into the palace, then unrolled in front of the Roman general. She was 21. He was 52. The spectacle worked. Caesar was fascinated, not just by her appearance, but by her presence, her confidence, and her ambition. She spoke several languages, she was politically sharp, and she offered Caesar something no one else in Egypt could: a stable regime he could control. He made his choice. He backed Cleopatra. Ptolemy XIII was furious. His supporters rioted. Civil war broke out, again, this time in Alexandria itself. Over the winter of 48–47 BCE, Caesar and Cleopatra were trapped inside the royal quarter, surrounded by Egyptian troops. Caesar called for reinforcements. A Roman force arrived, fought through the harbour, and defeated the Egyptian army at the Battle of the Nile in early 47 BCE. Ptolemy XIII drowned trying to escape. He was 15. With him gone, Caesar restored Cleopatra to the throne. She was made co-ruler again, this time with her younger brother Ptolemy XIV, just 12 years old. But the real power was hers. Later that year, Cleopatra gave birth to a son. She named him Ptolemy XV. The Alexandrians called him Caesarion, Little Caesar. Officially, he was the son of a Ptolemy. Unofficially, everyone believed, and Cleopatra insisted, that he was the son of Julius Caesar. Caesar never publicly acknowledged him. but he did bring Cleopatra and the child to Rome in 46 BCE. In 46 BCE, Cleopatra arrived in Rome. She came not as a refugee or exile, but as a queen, the sovereign ruler of Egypt, guest of the Roman dictator Julius Caesar. Her younger brother Ptolemy XIV, now about 13, came with her. So did her baby son Caesarion. They were housed in one of Caesar's private villas across the Tiber River, likely on the Janiculum Hill. Cleopatra did not live inside the Roman Forum, nor did she parade through the streets. But her presence was known, she was visible, and she made people uneasy. Rome was already tense. Julius Caesar had declared himself dictator for life. He had filled the Senate with his allies. He was passing reforms fast and ignoring tradition. Then came Cleopatra, a foreign queen from the East, worshipped as a goddess, who may have claimed to be Caesar's wife in everything but name. To the Romans, this felt dangerous. Many Roman senators distrusted her. They viewed her as a threat to Roman values. They feared Caesar might name her son Caesarion as his heir and turn the republic into a dynasty, a foreign one. Despite the tension, Cleopatra stayed in Rome for more than a year. Caesar honored her publicly. He even ordered a golden statue of her placed inside the temple of Venus Genetrix, a temple he had built to honor his mythical ancestor Venus. No other foreign ruler had ever been shown such respect inside the Roman capital. But not everyone was impressed. Some mocked Cleopatra in secret. Others whispered about her hold over Caesar. Many simply watched and waited. On March 15, 44 BCE, the Senate struck back. Julius Caesar was assassinated, stabbed 23 times by a group of senators, including Brutus and Cassius, who called themselves liberators. Their goal was to save the Republic, to end Caesar's rule, and to prevent a monarchy. Cleopatra, hearing the news, knew what it meant. Rome was no longer safe. She left quickly, returned to Egypt. Her son Caesarion went with her. So did her brother Ptolemy XIV. But soon after their arrival, Ptolemy XIV died, most likely poisoned. Cleopatra did not wait for another co-ruler to be chosen. Instead, she made Caesarion, still just a toddler, her official co-regent and king. Ptolemy XV Caesar, son of Julius Caesar. She was now the sole power in Egypt, but the storm in Rome was only beginning. After Caesar's assassination in 44 BCE, Rome descended into chaos. The assassins, Brutus, Cassius, and their allies, had hoped to restore the Republic, but instead, their actions created a power vacuum. In that vacuum, a new force emerged, the Second Triumvirate. It was made up of three men: Mark Antony, Caesar's loyal general; Octavian, Caesar's adopted son and heir, just 18 years old; Lepidus, a seasoned politician and military commander. Together they claimed to act in Caesar's name, to punish his killers, restore order and control Rome. In 43 BCE, they met near modern-day Bologna and officially formed the Second Triumvirate under Roman law. Their agreement gave them total power. Soon after, they launched proscriptions, a campaign of political killings. Enemies were hunted, their property seized, their names crossed off lists. Even Cicero, Rome's greatest orator, was executed. The triumvirs then turned their eyes to Caesar's killers. In 42 BCE, the armies of Antony and Octavian marched east and defeated Brutus and Cassius at the Battle of Philippi in Macedonia. Brutus committed suicide, Cassius too. With the assassins gone, the three triumvirs divided the Roman world among themselves. Antony took the eastern provinces, including Greece, Asia Minor, and the Levant. Octavian took the west, including Italy, Gaul, and Spain. Lepidus was given North Africa, but he was quickly sidelined. Now Mark Antony ruled the Roman East, and in that East one ally mattered most: Cleopatra VII, Queen of Egypt. In 41 BCE, Mark Antony summoned Cleopatra to the city of Tarsus in modern-day Turkey. He wanted to question her loyalty. Cleopatra had supported Julius Caesar, not Brutus or Cassius, But Antony needed proof. He wanted Egypt's gold, Egypt's grain, Egypt's ships, and perhaps more. Cleopatra accepted his summons, but on her terms. She arrived in a golden barge, dressed as the goddess Isis, surrounded by dancers, musicians, and incense. According to the historian Plutarch, she floated up the river like a vision, knowing exactly how to impress a Roman general. Antony was captivated. They spent days feasting, talking, laughing. Soon after, Cleopatra invited Antony to return with her to Alexandria. He accepted. There he lived in her palace, enjoyed Egyptian luxury, took part in the famous, inimitable livers, a private drinking club where Cleopatra and Antony hosted banquets, games, and spectacles. It wasn't just pleasure, it was politics. Cleopatra needed protection. Egypt was still rich but vulnerable, surrounded by Roman provinces, at risk of invasion if she backed the wrong man. Antony needed resources. He was preparing for a campaign against Parthia, Rome's eastern enemy. He needed money, food, ships. Cleopatra could provide them. In exchange, Antony agreed to protect her throne and confirmed her rule over Cyprus, Crete, parts of Syria, and Cyrenaica, modern Libya. By the end of 41 BCE, the alliance was clear. Cleopatra and Antony were now lovers and political partners. Their fate, and Egypt, was tied to Rome once again. In 40 BCE, civil war nearly broke out between Antony and Octavian. Tensions rose after Antony's brother, Lucius Antonius, and his wife Fulvia, Antony's own wife, rebelled against Octavian in Italy. Their motives were unclear. Maybe they wanted to protect Antony's position in the West. Maybe they were jealous of Cleopatra's growing influence. Octavian responded swiftly. He laid siege to the city of Perugia, modern-day Perugia, where Lucius had taken refuge. After a long winter siege, Lucius surrendered. Fulvia fled to Greece, where she died shortly after. Some say of disease, others say of heartbreak. This war embarrassed Antony. To restore peace with Octavian, Antony returned to Italy in 40 BCE and agreed to a new treaty, the Treaty of Brundisium. Under its terms, Antony would remain ruler of the eastern provinces. Octavian would rule the west. To seal the deal, Antony agreed to marry Octavia, Octavian's sister. The marriage was political. Octavia was intelligent, calm, and dignified, the perfect Roman matron. She bore Antony 2 daughters, Antonia Major and Antonia Minor, and helped stabilize relations between the 2 men. But Cleopatra remained in Alexandria, and in her palace she was raising Antony's twin children, Alexander Helios and Cleopatra Selene, born in 40 BCE. It was a delicate balance. Antony was legally married to Octavia, but he was still loyal to Cleopatra. And as time passed, he drifted further from Rome and closer to Egypt. In 37 BCE, Antony returned to the east, officially to prepare for a major campaign against Parthia. But his real destination was Alexandria. There, he reunited with Cleopatra, and soon their 3rd child was born, Ptolemy Philadelphus. In 34 BCE, Antony made his most radical move yet. He held a grand ceremony in Alexandria, the so-called Donations of Alexandria, where he gave away vast territories to Cleopatra and their children. Cleopatra was declared Queen of Kings. Alexander Helios was named King of Armenia, Media, and Parthia, even though Rome hadn't conquered those lands yet. Cleopatra Selene was given Cyrenaica and Crete. Ptolemy Philadelphus was awarded Syria and Asia Minor. Caesarion, Cleopatra's son with Julius Caesar, was declared King of Kings, co-ruler of Egypt, and the only legitimate heir of Caesar. This was not symbolic. Antony dressed in Greek robes, not Roman armor. He stood beside Cleopatra, not Octavia. He crowned children who were half Egyptian, and he publicly denied Octavian's claim to Caesar's legacy. In Roman eyes, this was betrayal. Octavian used it as propaganda. He painted Antony as a traitor, seduced by a foreign queen, raising illegitimate heirs abandoning Roman values. Rome had tolerated Cleopatra as Caesar's lover, but now she was something worse, a queen interfering in Roman politics, declaring her children kings of Roman provinces, challenging Roman law. It was a direct threat. The stage was set for war by 33 BCE. The alliance between Mark Antony and Octavian had collapsed completely. The donations of Alexandria had pushed Rome too far. Octavian knew exactly what to do. He turned public opinion against Antony by focusing on Cleopatra. She became the symbol of everything Rome feared: luxury, Eastern decadence, monarchy, and foreign rule. He told the Senate that Antony had become a puppet, a Roman general serving an Egyptian queen. He said Cleopatra wanted to make Alexandria the new capital of the empire. He said she had bewitched Antony and poisoned his mind. To the Roman elite, it was a perfect story, and they believed it. In 32 BCE, Antony officially divorced Octavia, Octavian's sister. That was the final insult. Octavian took Antony's will, stored with the Vestal Virgins, and read it aloud to the Senate. In it, Antony requested to be buried in Alexandria beside Cleopatra. It confirmed everyone's worst fears. The Senate declared war, not on Antony, but on Cleopatra. This wasn't just politics, it was a culture war. Rome versus Egypt. Octavian versus Cleopatra. The final war of the Roman Republic had begun. Antony and Cleopatra gathered their forces in Greece. They had around 500 ships, 100,000 infantry, and 12,000 cavalry, a massive army. Cleopatra financed much of the campaign. She brought her treasury, her fleet, and her gold, but their strategy was flawed. Octavian had fewer troops, but his general, Marcus Agrippa, was brilliant. Agrippa cut off Antony's supply lines and seized key ports. Slowly, Antony and Cleopatra were boxed in. In 31 BCE, their fleet was trapped in the Gulf of Ambracia near Actium. They had no choice but to fight. The Battle of Actium, on September 2nd, 31 BCE, the decisive battle took place. Antony and Cleopatra's ships were heavier, built for ramming. Octavian's were smaller and faster. Agrippa controlled the sea with superior tactics. Cleopatra commanded her own squadron. She waited behind the front lines. When the battle turned against them, she made a sudden decision. She fled the battle with her fleet, heading south to Egypt. Antony saw her retreat. Without hesitation, he followed her, abandoning his men. It was a disastrous move. The rest of Antony's forces were confused. Many surrendered. Others were slaughtered. The war was effectively over. Antony and Cleopatra had lost everything: their fleet, their armies, their allies, and their reputation. They returned to Egypt in defeat. Octavian did not chase them immediately. He took his time. He wanted to destroy them politically before destroying them physically. He sent messages across the empire. Antony had abandoned his army for a woman. Cleopatra had manipulated Roman politics for her own gain. Caesar's heir, Octavian, was restoring order. In 30 BCE, Alexandria, once the crown jewel of the Eastern Mediterranean, was surrounded. Octavian approached from the east with a massive army. Inside the city, Cleopatra and Mark Antony were running out of options. Their allies were gone, their fleet destroyed, their troops demoralized, and their people terrified. But Cleopatra didn't surrender. She fortified the palace, she hid her treasure, and she prepared for one last stand, not in war, but in negotiation. Her final hope was to use her wealth, her children, and her influence to secure some form of survival, maybe not for herself, but for her dynasty. Cleopatra tried to meet Octavian through messengers. She offered to abdicate, to send away Antony, even to give up her crown, as long as her children could rule Egypt in peace. Octavian listened, but he never agreed. He wanted Egypt, all of it, and he wanted Cleopatra, alive, but only for a purpose, a trophy. He planned to parade her through the streets of Rome in chains, a spectacle, a humiliation. She knew what that meant, and she refused. Antony was living in denial. He still believed Octavian could be defeated. But as his forces deserted and supplies ran dry, he began to unravel. One day, he heard a false report. Cleopatra was dead. In despair, he tried to kill himself. He stabbed himself in the stomach, but he didn't die immediately. His guards found him bleeding on the floor. He begged them to carry him to Cleopatra's mausoleum, where she had barricaded herself. She had not died. but she was trapped. They hauled Antony up to the window. Cleopatra saw him, dying. They pulled him inside. He collapsed in her arms. And there, Mark Antony died. Now alone, Cleopatra dressed in her finest royal robes. She made her way to her tomb, bringing with her 2 trusted servants, Charmian and Iris. She sent one final message to Octavian. She was dead. Then, according to Roman accounts, she took her life. The details are uncertain. Some say she used poison. Others say she allowed an asp, a venomous Egyptian snake, to bite her arm or her breast. Either way, on August 12, 30 BCE, Cleopatra VII, the last pharaoh of Egypt, was dead. She was 39 years old. Octavian arrived too late to stop her. He found her lifeless, lying beside her handmaidens, all 3 in silence. He was furious, but he respected her resolve. He ordered that Cleopatra be buried with Antony as she had wished. Her children were captured. Her son with Caesar, Caesarion, was hunted down and executed. Her other children, Alexander Helios, Cleopatra Selene, and Ptolemy Philadelphus, were taken to Rome and raised by Octavia. And Egypt? Egypt became a Roman province. The age of pharaohs was over, the Ptolemies were gone, and Octavian, now Augustus, would become the first emperor of Rome. For centuries, Cleopatra their Philopator became more than a queen, more than a ruler. She became a symbol, reshaped, reimagined, and retold across generations. But behind every myth is a human. The Romans wrote the first version of her story. They painted her as a seductress, a manipulator, a danger to men. Not because it was true, but because it justified her defeat. To them, Cleopatra was too powerful, too smart, too independent, too foreign. So, they rewrote her. They made her into the villain, or the temptress, or the mad queen. But she was more. Cleopatra spoke at least 7 languages. She studied astronomy, medicine, philosophy, and mathematics. She negotiated with generals, commanded fleets, ruled a nation, outlived 3 siblings, fought 2 civil wars. She stood her ground against the most powerful empire on earth, and for a time, she won. Her coins show her not as a beauty, but as a leader. Strong nose, stern eyes, no smiles. Because she didn't need to be adored, she needed to be obeyed. After her death, Egypt was no longer independent, its temples silenced, its language replaced by Latin and Greek. But Cleopatra never disappeared. Medieval scholars studied her, Renaissance painters romanticized her, Shakespeare wrote about her, Hollywood cast her in gold. In every age, she became what the world wanted her to be. But the truth, the raw, complex, difficult truth, is this. Cleopatra was not a goddess. She was not a monster. She was a ruler, a mother, a survivor, and in the end, a defeated human being who refused to be paraded as someone else's victory. And that, more than any myth, is what made her unforgettable. If you reached this part of the video, thank you. Cleopatra's life was dramatic, tragic, and deeply misunderstood. If you learned something new, or saw her story in a different light, leave a like and consider sharing this video. Your support helps us keep telling history the way it really was. We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Who should we cover next? Another queen? A forgotten emperor? A misunderstood thinker? Drop your suggestions below, and don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss the next story.